new level of Ingram. This is Ingram running with a Chris Ivory type burst with the consistency he's had throughout his career already. He's always been a 4 yards a carry guy. He just wasn't exciting. Now he's exciting Ingram, and I really don't know what to say about it because I didn't see this coming. I've always defended Ingram as a good back who's just that. He's a lower Pro Bowl level echelon player, and I know 4 games is a very small sample to be building this off of, but if he could end the season like he's done the past 3 weeks, he's more of that great echelon that we've wanted and expected from his first-round status.
Yeah, and it's I give nothing but props to him. I don't think I'll ever put Mark – I can't say ever, but he would have to do a lot for me to put him in that great status. Just because, to me, and this is just my personal opinion, for a player to be considered great, you have to produce because of you beyond contestation. And I'm not knocking what he's done the last few weeks at all, but there has been a noticeable improvement in the run blocking on a lot of the runs he's getting. Now, some of these he is creating on his own. He's making a guy miss. He's doing what he's supposed to do. But the big thing is, and this is something coaches talk about all the time with running backs, except for the few special ones.
Yeah.
You've got to get him to if I
let me
can
be
get you
clear,
to the
I've
second
never
level,
made a case for Ingram being one of the special ones.
No, and it's because you're not a fool. That's not a knock on Mark. It's really not. When I say special, I mean
there's very few Petersons and Tomlinsons,
Adrian
and Sanders.
Sanders,
very rare.
And you know those guys the first time you look at them. You take
once
one
every
look
10-year type of guy.
Him, Leonard Fournette. If we want to look at college, one of those where you just go and you go, that's not human.
Yeah.
That humans can't do that. That's not human. Those guys are in an entirely different category and they defy expectation. Mark's not one of those. But what I find, and this is actually the part that makes me think this might be sustainable. Mark is a run to daylight back. He picks the right hole. He runs with balance. He runs with intelligence. And when he runs with intent, he gets there when he needs to get there. But he doesn't make something out of nothing. And when he does, that something is 2 or 3 yards, which is fine. Because 2 or 3 instead of -2 is still, 4 or 5 yards.
Let's also be honest. We don't need a running back. We don't need a Peterson or Tomlinson in the Saints offense because no matter how good of a running back it is, it will always be a Drew Brees pass-oriented offense. Always.
Oh, absolutely. But one of those guys doesn't – the thing is those types of players, just to be devil's advocate, they don't need 20 carries a game. Those guys can give you $150 on 10 carries. Because if they're running against 6-man boxes, which against Drew Brees, you got to throw a few of those out. And if the back can pass protect at all, that dual threat element enters the equation. And all you got to do is run a draw play with them. And when those guys hit the second level, they don't have a 20-yard run. They're gone. They're still running today. And that's the difference between them. It's why if you have a player like a Fournette or a Dalvin Cook or you can go to other players in the league like a Davion Bell, some of these other guys that have that element, it enhances to the next level. But there's a difference between want and need. The Saints don't need a player like that. Of course you want one. Who doesn't want one?
Who would pass up on a fresh AP? I mean, nobody.
Yeah, an idiot. But what they need, and this is what gives me hope against Detroit, what gives me hope against Tampa, and these other teams, what they need is consistently productive, occasionally explosive, which is what Ingram has become these last few weeks. He doesn't have to go for 20. He doesn't have to go for 10 the majority of his carries. But what he has to do is not go for 2. You can't, unless it gets blown up in the backfield, that's on the line. It's out of your control.
That has happened a lot, too. I will say that because as much as – I mean, you've talked about Hightower as well. As much as I've come against Hightower in a lot of ways, there's so many plays where he doesn't have a snowball chance in hell. I mean, there's 3 people. I remember Sunday, Aaron Donald is smacking his face mask with his 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage. There's nothing he can do. Our line has shown improvement, but it also has those moments where it just lets the entire defense swarm through.
Yeah, they play the Red Sea defense every now and then. They got a little James Harden in them. It's okay. And considering what a patchwork this offensive line has been, and before we kind of segue over to the Lions game, I actually had one question I wanted to ask you about, because I know we talked about this in a little bit of the offseason, and I think both of us were on the give it time train. How impressed have you been with the improvement of one Andres Pete?
I mean, I've been very impressed. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Let me add this, and I will admit I am guilty of it. Most teams in the NFL don't expect first offensive linemen to just come out and be amazing. Whereas Saints fans, we got spoiled with guys like Evans and Nix and Stinchcomb and these other guys and Brown and Teron Armstead.
I don't know if we got spoiled with Brown.
Well, he was a very serviceable LT who left and wasn't very good, but he wasn't a bust.
You meant the other Brown.
No.
That's why I was like, what are you
no, we've had two Browns. We've had two of them.
I'm on the same page.
I'm talking about the good one.
The guy that gave Teron his job.
No. Anyway, we expected him to develop into something so quickly, mainly because Streif had such a bad season last year, and yet Streif's come around this year and has looked back to Pro Bowl level. I hate to say that because I've ragged him so much, but he's really only struggled against elite edge rushers, specifically speed rushers. Everybody else, he's been pretty dang solid against. So, I mean, I can't knock him. He's played that well. So for Pete to not only not be playing at the position we drafted him for, but to have played two positions this year and admirably well, I think he's allowed more pressures than I think a lot of people realize and more sacks than a lot of people realize, but he's played so well on that left side. It actually brings up in my mind, should we even move him to right tackle? Left side was his natural side anyway. Just sit him next to Armstead and find another spot, another player for that right side. That's my thought on it. To answer your question, I've been incredibly impressed with, it's not just his blocking, it's his understanding of the zone blocking scheme we're running. He's not lost or confused or slow. He's attacking defenders with conviction, a word that's used for Ingram. He's not lunging at players like he used to do in college, which is something that Mike Mayock talked about, that he would have moments where he would lunge and miss completely. He's more patient in his block, which allows him to be more forceful with his very impressive size. He's just changed his whole mentality as a blocker. You know, and that's what's impressed me. It's his physical attributes have always been there, but he's assimilated to the book so well, and he's changed who he is as a blocker to where he is now an NFL quality player to match his NFL size.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge advocate of the 3-year rule with draft picks, except in two cases. Either stars or bust. You know a bust when you see one, you know a star when you see one. Everyone else, you give them 3 years to find who they are or prove who they are. And Andres Pete is still a work in progress as a pass blocker. He's doing well, but there are very clear areas where he can continue to improve, technique issues that he can shore up, understanding defense. It's also sometimes you just get beat. Like everyone gets beat.
And to be fair, edge rushers were his big problem in college when he would have problems. And that's really the only thing he struggled with in the NFL that I've watched is mostly speed guys. And that's mostly coaching because he doesn't get his hips turned in low enough. He tries to use his body.
Him as a guard.
And as a guard, that usually helps prevent that from happening, which is why I'm kind of keen to the idea to leave him next to Armstead and between Unger and have an amazing left side of the line instead of putting him back at right tackle and wondering where we're going to find guards. But that's just my thinking.
I completely agree with that. It's also, I think it's much easier to find a serviceable right tackle than it is a dominant. And the one area where Pete has been incredible most of the year has been run blocking. He is so physical. He's got that nasty mean streak you want to see.
And not just that,
you can't teach that.
He's faster than that. What do you run, a 5.2 in the combine? But what impressed me is if you go back and watch the Ingram screen, I realized that there was basically nobody to block because it was so well called. But Andres Pete was ahead of Ingram down at the 5-yard line. That guy was motoring, looking for somebody to demolish. And that's the kind of lineman I want on my football team.
And the funny thing is, remember last year when Lyle got taken by Dallas, and there were plays like that, exact same type of scenario, and Saints Twitter was just bemoaning and losing our minds, rightfully so, because guard was a problem last year. They might have accidentally. Now, I'm not putting Andres on the same level as Lyle, but the gap isn't as big as some people might think it is.
Well, to be fair, and this is not me trying to over-promote Pete, but if you've watched Lyle, honestly, if we're taking a small sample size, because Pete hasn't spent a lot of time at guard this year, he's had to switch between LT and guard. I'd argue that he's done better considering what Lyle is surrounded by, which, as I've stated many times this year, is the best offensive line in the NFC, arguably the best offensive line in the NFL. Whereas Pete does not have that same. Close. Yeah, I'm just saying that because there's always somebody who watches some team more than I do, or somebody. To me, they've got the best line, period. I always add that caveat just because I watch NFC games more than I do AFC. So I leave myself a little scapegoat there. So because
that's fair,
of that,
but you're nicer than me. I'll say they're the best line in the NFL, and if you disagree, prove it.
And I'm cool with that. Me and you're on the same page. I just like to leave myself a little leeway. With that said, though, Pete does not sit in that same position. The only thing Pete can say he has better is a Hall of Fame quarterback. And that's it. He doesn't have a better running back. No offense, Mark Ingram. He doesn't have a better, right guard, right tackle, maybe center, as much as I like Unger. And since Teron Armstead's been hurt, I can't say he has a better left tackle because we haven't had a full-time LT there. So for what he's had around him, I say he's doing better. And I know that's dangerous waters for me to be treading in, but that's how good I believe he's progressed this year in that spot.
I think that's difficult to disagree with. And, the best part is the Saints just very quietly, I won't say dominated because Drew got hit a lot, although a lot of that had to do with, Greg.
Well,
Greg
come on, let's
admit
who they're playing against too.
And that's what I was going to say. They just almost and kind of pseudo-dominated the best front in football. Period.
And I don't think there's really any way to put it. Yes, that front is going to get their pressures and their sacks, but one, when your quarterback throws over 70% accuracy, and two, when your running backs together, specifically Ingram, though, just because he had the better of the two games, demolished that front seven. There's no other way to put it. It doesn't matter. They could have got 7 sacks on Drew Brees. That offensive line won that game because of how the team performed as a whole.
Yeah, well, and kind of what I was just kind of alluding to on that, that's against St. Louis.
Yeah.
They're coming up against Detroit next.
Which has 20 sacks all year.
They have one good defensive line. Now, Ziggy Ansah is a monster. He is. And he's kind of like he's not a better player, but he's a better pass rusher than Cam Jordan. But he's in a similar situation where teams know that guy.
For anybody who studies film, he's a different player too. I mean, where Cam Jordan is more of a 5 tech, Ziggy's more of that speed edge 9 guy too. He's more of a pure pass rusher, whereas Cam he can do everything at a Pro Bowl level, including stop the run, rush the passer, but he's not going to be that guy. You know what I mean?
Cam Jordan is an elite NFL defensive lineman, period. Now, he's not an elite pass rusher, but overall total package defensive lineman.
Let me, because we've agreed too much on this show, so I got to throw this disagreement out there. I would say he is an elite pass rusher at his position, and when I say that, I'm talking about the right end position, because we have to get specific in the defensive line. If you're throwing in left ends and 3-4 outside linebackers, then yeah, he gets knocked down the rung a lot. But if we're talking about his position, you'd be tough pressed to find me somebody better overall, even in pass rush, specifically at his spot. That's very fair. I probably could argue with it a little bit. But even if you could argue, you're going to give me up a couple names. So we're still talking an elite person. You can't give me 5 names at that one spot better than Cam Jordan.
I definitely can't, and that's a really good thing to have. What gives me